Crisis amplifies the stories of the small business owners, startup founders, and scale-up entrepreneurs that are thinking big and finding opportunity in crisis, as well as inspiring a new generation. This program is brought to you by Business Day and Endeavor. And Endeavor is a mission-driven global organization that believes that job creation, innovation, and overall prosperity flourish where there is a robust support for high-impact entrepreneurs. And joining me today is Bryan Mezue, who is a co-founder and chief executive officer at LifeStores Healthcare. LifeStores is building a world where equal access to essential primary healthcare is available to you regardless of who you are, what you earn, or where you live. So Bryan, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for being a guest. I'd like to start by asking you how you're doing in this COVID-19 global pandemic.
Thanks, Lele. Thanks so much for having us and for having me specifically. I'm doing okay. I think it's an interesting time for everyone, right? Because it's, the fact that it hit the whole world together, I think, kind of makes us have to all realize that we're all human and we're all the same. And so, no matter what any one of us is feeling individually, that's probably somebody out there who's experiencing that 10 times more than you are. And so I think, it's a time for humility. I think it's a time for kind of reflection. But, for us, obviously, in the healthcare industry, it's also a very busy time. So I'm sure we'll talk more about that.
I can only imagine,
yeah.
Yes. Okay, so could you tell us and the audience a little bit about what LifeStores Healthcare is all about?
Sure. So I think you did a great job of sharing what our vision is. So it's about a world with equal access to essential primary healthcare, and that's regardless of who you are, what you earn, or where you live. And for us, what we've identified at LifeStores is that for certain countries, and this is true to some extent for all countries, but especially in emerging markets, pharmacies play a pretty central role in delivering essential primary healthcare. So, if you're sick, if you have a cough or a cold, often in places like Nigeria, the first place you go to is to your pharmacist. You maybe have a conversation, maybe you feel like you know what you have already, so you diagnose yourself, and then you go to the pharmacist and ask for a medicine. But instead of kind of calling a doctor, you don't have enough doctors around, so you have this interaction, this special relationship with the pharmacist. And so for us, if you're going to try and fix access to healthcare, you better kind of fix pharmacies or help pharmacies do a better job. And there's tons of areas that pharmacies need help, whether it's making sure the right drugs are available at the right time, or making sure you can get the prices at the lowest amount, or improving the quality of service so that you're giving the right advice and making people feel good when they walk into the stores, and a bunch of other things that we can now do with technology, right? Telemedicine, online deliveries, using data to do cool personalization features for clients. These are all areas that pharmacies, in some areas, are doing okay, but certainly could do a lot better. And so for us, if you want to democratize access to primary healthcare, if you want to make it easy for you, Lele, or for anyone else to have access to fantastic healthcare, there's almost nowhere else to start off but pharmacies, especially in emerging markets. So we offer tons of services to pharmacies. We actually started off running our own pharmacies and just learning how pharmacies work. And we retain a brand called LifeStores Pharmacy. But then from that, we've built software services that we think, really the rest of the industry can hopefully benefit from.
Okay. I mean, I definitely see, I see how a service, a company like yours could be, bridging the gap between people having access to affordable healthcare. And as you mentioned, pharmacies are the key point for most people. Typically people don't go straight to the doctor; they go straight to the pharmacy. So can I ask, what was the motivation factor for you to start this kind of company? Because it seems like you're really trying to solve a very specific problem. So I'd like to find out a little bit about what's inspired you to start this particular kind of company.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, sometimes I ask myself the same question, but but it's
Right.
I think, for a lot of entrepreneurs, like the things that they end up dedicating a lot of their efforts and their life to, there's like
Yes.
a personal dimension to it. There's often
Mhm.
some sort of personal experience.
Right.
And for me, so, I come from a family of medics. I have two siblings that are doctors. My dad is a doctor, my mom is a nurse. So it's one of
Mhm.
those families where if you're not a doctor, then everyone's kind of like,
Then
what
what
are
are
you
you
doing
doing?
here? Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
lost sheep.
Okay.
So to some level, I had always kind of grown up around medicine,
Okay.
but very specifically for me, I went into the world of business after I finished university, and then I also kind of went to business school
Mhm.
afterwards after a few years of working as a consultant. And at business school, I had a good experience, but I had a highlight, which was an experience with one of my professors
Mhm.
called Clay Christensen. I took one of his classes in my second
Mhm.
year at business school, and he invited me to spend a year with him doing some research afterwards. And the research was really around how do you create prosperity using his principles of disruptive innovation. How do you create prosperity in emerging markets? And it really changed the way that I saw the world. I think before that, I probably wouldn't have seen myself coming back to Nigeria to work in Nigeria.
Mhm.
But I think that experience got me thinking about Nigeria. And then when I combined that with my healthcare background from a family perspective,
Right.
and actually my uncle actually also runs pharmacies in Nigeria, so I had been advising him
Okay.
on the side. So that intersection of kind of disruptive innovation and healthcare, that's where the idea started to come forward from. And then
Fantastic.
obviously over a few years did some research, tested a
Yes.
few things out, and then figured that there was really a space here to try something out.
Okay, well, that's really great to hear, and I really look forward to finding out a bit more about your journey before, life stores, and also kind of more about the professor that you mentioned towards the end of the show. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the crisis. So, how is Life Store doing throughout this crisis? How has the crisis affected your business?
Yeah, so I mean, first and foremost, we are in the midst of the essential services space, if you will, right?
Yes.
So, more than most people, our staff is there at the front line dealing with this. So we never closed. So, we have pharmacies, in Lagos that have been serving patients all the way through. And it was interesting. So, I think probably towards the end of March is when we started to kind of see a lot of activity
Hmm.
um, within our pharmacies, so our branded pharmacies. And then, very quickly afterwards, we started to see a lot of activities. We also support third-party pharmacies in addition to our branded pharmacies. So we started to see activity there as well. And there are several ways that, we've kind of had to adapt. So firstly, of course, we have to make sure that our staff is being kept safe. And,
Right.
very, very quickly changing our processes, procuring PPE. Obviously you want to have PPE for patients, but first and foremost, the staff have to be safe. So
Right.
we had a town hall to make sure that we are addressing people's concerns on how do they get into work under lockdown,
Hmm.
what happens if they fall sick,
Hmm.
do they kind of have some kind of flexibility if stuff happens at home as well. We had to deal with many of those kind of very practical issues for people to make sure they were comfortable. And then, just change how our flow works within the store. So normally, we can have up to like 10 people standing within a store, but,
Right.
now you're kind of like one person in at a time, right? And you have to
Wow.
make sure
So
that
you have
person has
100%
a
of the
mask.
time.
Yeah, exactly. Just to make
Okay.
sure people are safe. And of course, even a lot of patients would typically walk to a pharmacy, but now you're a bit worried to leave your house, right? So we had to very dramatically scale up our delivery services, working in
Okay.
partnership with a few kind of delivery partners in Lagos. We're offering delivery across the whole city.
Hmm.
Um, we're starting to offer telemedicine as well, in partnership with one of the telemedicine providers. So really just kind of trying to get people where they are. You know, if you don't want to walk out of your house, but you have diabetes or hypertension, or you need to see a doctor, we can work with you to figure out how to make that feasible. So those were some of the first changes that we saw. You know, interestingly, you know, we were privileged to be invited to advise the isolation center in Etiosa. So we, you know, helped them to create their drug formulary along the way. We've also advised a few other NGOs and kind of non-private sector players thinking about their response to the crisis. So that's an area that, you know, for us, we think that all the knowledge we're picking up by actually being on the front line, there is more and more opportunity for us to figure out ways to make that scalable and to get to system level change. And this crisis has made that very clear for us. But I think, you know, those are some of the main changes, you know, kind of stepping back. So some very kind of clear changes within our stores to make it easier for people and safer for people to access their medicines. Some changes for patients that are at home, so giving them, you know, more ways to actually access us. And then, you know, I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit more later on down the line, but as I said, we're supporting third-party pharmacies, so we are trying to enable them to also offer better services to their patients through the crisis. But it's evolving. You know, there's, you know, we're not through the woods yet, so let's see where things go.
Let's see what comes. Okay, but it seems like you've kind of been able to pivot a little bit and just think outside the box, you know, in ways that you can, you know, scale your business in this time. So I have a question for you. Do you find that people have been reluctant to adopt this this system of getting their medicines delivered to them at home? You know, because people traditionally like to go into the pharmacy, have a conversation with the pharmacist, etc. So have you found any reluctance from people receiving their medicine at home as opposed to going into the pharmacies themselves?
Yeah, great question. So I think what we found is that firstly, it depends on the profile of the person, right? So if you are somebody who's used to consuming, you know, services, social media, you know, a bunch of stuff through your phone already, then it's not a big jump. But actually, you know, a lot of the people that walk into pharmacies and need those services in Nigeria are older generation. So, you know, people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and above who have often chronic conditions. A lot of people don't know this, but up to 1 in 3 Nigerian adults has hypertension. You know, maybe up to 15% has diabetes. Wow. Exactly. And for a lot of them, it's not diagnosed, right? It's something that they find out when they come into our stores to do their blood pressure test or anything else. And for many of these people, they're a little bit older. And so not all of them, but a lot of them tend to prefer to have that physical interaction. It's just a force of habit. And you know, what we've seen is that people who fall into that category, they just come a little bit less than they used to before. So maybe they'll wait until they're very, very desperate to get their drugs to come in. So they'll still come to the stores, but they're trying to maybe spread out those visits a bit more. So for us, there's a lot of work to be done to educate people that, you know, it's still the same service. It will come right to your door, and you know, you can trust us on that. But you know, I think it will take a while. Healthcare is like notoriously one of the most traditional and conservative industries. So you know, what we're doing is a long-term play.
Okay, no, well, thank you for that. And you know, as you know, there's a myriad of challenges when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry, the medical industry in the country, not just this country, but many other developing countries. You know, things such as procurement inefficiencies, outdated systems, and kind of inconsistent service, not to mention, you know, counterfeit drugs and things of that nature. So I wonder if we can have a conversation around that, just to kind of talk about how your company is trying to reduce these inefficiencies.
Yeah, A lot of the challenges that you've laid out, I would say they stem from some of the dynamics of the industry in the pharmacy retail space sector in Nigeria. So, I don't know if you've visited like a CVS in the US or Walgreens, but often, in those more developed markets, you will have like a big player or a big set of players, maybe the top 2 or 3 players will have like 30% market share or maybe even larger, and really control a big portion of the industry. And what that allows them to do is that they can actually kind of have a lot of impact on how drugs flow through the ecosystem. So it's much less likely that you have, penetration of fake medicines, because it's clear that most medicines have to flow through, this distributor to that retailer. And there's also lots of, concentration on the distribution side as well. What's interesting in markets like Nigeria and many emerging markets that we call home is that it's much more fragmented, right? So maybe the largest player will have like 1% market share or 2% market share for many reasons. And many of these players are now growing very quickly, and it's great to see what's to come there. But where we are today is that it's very, very fragmented. And so it's actually quite difficult for any one player to consistently have a clear supply line with 0% chance of something coming in there to infiltrate or bring in fake medicines into that supply line. And so we think the long-term goal, the long-term vision to really solve this problem is somehow around coordinating pharmacies. So getting them to work together so that they can actually firstly have more buying power, so they can get potentially cheaper medicines for their patients, but also have more control over the flow of those medicines, so that you don't have fake medicines kind of jumping into the value chain in some way. And so for us, we're trying to provide the services, the software to allow that collaboration to happen, to support pharmacies along the way. So that's one thing. But certainly within our own stores, we have a lot of strategies to try and make sure that we never have any fake medicines, and we've never had a complaint. And we've run our own stores for 3 years. And I think there it's around making sure you choose your suppliers effectively. And we often will go for a more expensive supplier just because we can guarantee that they have the right systems in place. And then having checks at the point of receiving medicines. So you can obviously kind of check the packaging, but actually a lot of these fake medication guys are fantastic at packaging. So it's hard to see. It's very, very tiny things, discolorations or small things like that. And so we have a process and SOP for checking that as well. And then what we're trying to do also is to get our software involved, so that there are ways for us to backwards integrate with suppliers, and hopefully even in partnership with a few kind of innovative players in the space, be able to backwards integrate all the way to the manufacturers if possible. But I think those are kind of short-term things. I think really the longer-term thing here is about more of a top-down approach, where there is better coordination between pharmacists themselves, between pharmacists and suppliers, and then ultimately even going all the way back to manufacturers as well.
Fantastic. So you talked about your software. I'm interested to know about how technology has enabled you to run your business in a more efficient way.
Yeah, so in many ways, right? So for us, when we launched our pharmacy initially, it was a test period. It was, we need to figure out how pharmacies work. We know they're really important to the value ecosystem, but how do they actually work? Let's understand this space a little bit more. And in that process, we learned that there are a couple of areas that software and technology has a role to play. One of them is just around the basic running of a pharmacy. And so everything from inventory management, doing orders, trying to, if you can, automate that process. because actually a lot of the time, what takes up the most time for a pharmacist, non-selling time, so most of their administrative work is around getting orders ready. So you may have like 3,000 or 4,000 different products that you carry in your store, or sometimes even more. And so how do you kind of figure out when you need to order, a new batch of one
Right.
product out of that, So there's a lot of kind of like complexity there, or potential for complexity. And so how do you get software to automate that or make that very easy? So we brought software to play there. We also kind of just looked at the selling process. There are, obviously there's a bunch of points of sale providers already, software vendors that you can use. We looked at quite a few of them, but we just kind of felt like it was better to build our own. Just because there's a few things that are very unique to Nigeria, and Africa more broadly, that we didn't think anyone had really solved for. And so we built ours from scratch. We have a bunch of really cool, neat features in there, just based on what we've learned from running pharmacies, that we're seeing that makes our patients have a better experience at the point of sale. And so we have that module. We have a customer loyalty module, which means that maybe you walk into one of our stores and make a purchase. You have a great experience, I'm sure. But when you walk out of the store, when your medicine has run out, if you need kind of a regular top up, we can automatically remind you of that, so that you remember to come to the store and get your next dose. So we use software for for very basic things like that, but we are always looking for ways to add more features to it. What we'd love to build is a platform that allows both our stores and other pharmacies to be able to kind of suggest a new feature, and then we go from there with that. And hopefully over time it becomes exactly what pharmacists need.
Very, very nice. And have you been able to, so is the software only available for live stores, or is it also available for other pharmacies in the country?
So it's available for live stores in its full version, and we're actually just launching a leaner version of it for other pharmacies, for third-party pharmacies. We will add more features because we want to make sure that it's great and perfect before we kind of have it for everybody. But we are kind of testing the features within our own stores to see what it's like live. And then there's a few weeks gap or lag between when we launch features in our stores and when we launch it elsewhere right now. So we have a kind of a leaner feature that is mostly around inventory management. And we have a pipeline of pharmacies that have expressed interest actually. So it's a question of kind of figuring out how we scale it up over time.
Scale, essentially, yeah, because I think the medical field is becoming increasingly a digital space, whereby things that were done, by pen and paper before are now, on computers, and you can track all of these things. So I think that's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
The more pharmacies that have access to this, the better, right? So
absolutely.
Look forward to seeing that. Okay, that's great. I really enjoyed talking to you about your company and a little bit about more specifically how it works, your software. But I'd also like to talk a little bit about you as an entrepreneur and kind of your journey from where you started to where you are now. So I'm just gonna read a little bit about you, and then I'll ask you some specific questions.
Yeah, sure.
So you're an alumni fellow of the Harvard Forum for Growth and Innovation. As you mentioned, you co-published a feature called Foreign Affairs article with Professor Clayton Christensen on disruptive innovation and economic prosperity. You also founded Banyi Ventures, which is an investment and advisory company focused on supporting market-creating companies. And essentially, you're also an angel investor. You're also an inaugural Obama Foundation African leader, a board member at Wave Academies, and a contributor to the Harvard Business Review. You've worked as a manager at Bain & Company, where you were a founding member of the Nigeria office. And you've also worked in the UK, the US, and Brazil. You graduated with a Bachelor's of Science, first class, I might say, in mathematics and statistics from Warwick University, and you have a master's in business administration from Harvard Business School. So that's quite the profile. So before you you were the CEO of Life Stores. What were you doing before? Like what inspired you to do what you're doing now?
Yeah. So immediately before Life Stores, I actually was helping the Bain and Company office launch their Nigeria office, and so I worked. I had worked as a consultant before business school, and then post business school, I had this experience at the Forum for Growth and Innovation with Clay Christensen. And around about the same time, I got a call from my old company, Bain, and they were like, we're opening up an office in Nigeria. There's not many Nigerians in our system. Would you be interested in coming back and helping us do this? And that was really exciting. For me, it was kind of a soft landing to come back to Nigeria. Reorient myself, understand how the country works. Because I had never, I didn't grow up in Lagos. I grew up in kind of a small part of Nigeria. Not that small, actually. Not that small. I grew up in the east. I grew up in Enugu.
Okay, nice.
East of Nigeria. And I have a lot of love for Enugu. I think it's one of my favorite cities in the world. But it's not a. Yeah, exactly. It is. And my dad still lives there. So I go back there very frequently.
Very nice.
But I had never really. I think I might have been to Lagos once when I was growing up, so didn't know much about it and didn't have too much family in Lagos. So this was an opportunity with Bain to come back and understand the landscape in a softer setting, and figure out my plans over a period of time. So I had a great time, got to kind of meet some of the really big players in Lagos, understand the startup scene a bit better. And then off the back of that, left Bain and decided to launch this in 2017.
Fantastic. And what are some of the things that you feel like you learned earlier on in your career that you've been able to apply at Life Stores as a CEO? Some things that some mistakes that you may have made along the way, or maybe something that you learned earlier on that you're applying now as a co-founder and CEO.
Yeah. So I think firstly, I always say that where possible, I think especially in our context in emerging markets like Nigeria, where it's so unstructured, where possible, it's actually quite helpful to have a couple of years of structured experience, where you are working with people who've been in an industry for 10 years plus. It doesn't have to be consulting. It can be accounting. It can be finance. It can be, doesn't matter what it is, but just to understand how organizations that are running very well are run. And so for me, I think one of the big takeaways, actually working at Bain for a few years, was how powerful the culture built is, where you have young people that are very talented, and you throw them in, and actually it's like there's a black box, but 2 years later they all kind of come out with very, very polished. They speak in the same way. Yeah. They have the same analytical skills. They're great at presenting, and you can throw them into any industry, and they kind of pick it up quite easily, right? And so as I started Life Stores, I was like, I want to try and figure out ways, together with my co-founder and my team, to actually be that kind of culture for Nigeria, where we bring great talent, but when they leave us, if they leave us, we've given them so much that they're actually able to kind of say that they've learned some structured skills along the way. And if they want to go launch their own pharmacy off the back of that, we will support them and we'll work with them to do that. But that they've learned something while they're with us. So I think it's, getting to your question, I think it's about people. And I think that, I have learned through my previous career, I guess, a little bit about dealing with people. I think I've made a lot of mistakes along the way as well, that I'm trying to kind of bring to bear when I run my own organization, to basically create an environment that, you don't feel like your growth is stifled in any way, and the sky is the limit in terms of the
Right.
things you can get involved in, as a
Very,
business.
very nice. So essentially, you're trying to build, wholesome people within your organization, so that whether they decide to stay or decide to go elsewhere, they still bring the value to anywhere that they are. And I think that's great. That's definitely a good way to go about it. So would you say that the secret to your success has been putting people first in your company, like putting the employees first?
I think certainly
Or
100% our culture. Yeah. So, and culture is
yeah,
people, basically, right? So it's
your
people and
culture is
processes. Yeah. So
people.
I think we have a culture that is very, very unique at least in Nigeria, and we
Mhm.
think unique in general. But it's basically coming from a place that we don't see ourselves as having all the answers. We
Yeah,
try and create a culture that everybody feels they can contribute to innovation.
yeah. Okay. Great. So I have a couple of questions surrounding, how much of the reality should you be communicating with your employees and your investors at this time?
And you mean the reality of COVID, or yeah?
Yeah, this is the realities of COVID, the realities of how the business is changing. How do you communicate with your employees and your investors at this time?
Yeah. I think it's important to be open. I think it doesn't hurt anyone if you're open. Obviously, you know, you want to be as encouraging as possible. You don't, I think that there are situations where things are really, really, if you're in the travel industry,
Mhm.
it's a really hard industry to be in right now, and there's only
Yeah,
so much you can say, you can do, right? So it's important to be open, but to be encouraging and push people to see what they can do to improve, and improve the company and improve the situation, versus just sit on their hands. So our philosophy in general is to share where we are, both with investors and employees, and to tell them where things could go really well and where things could not go so well, and hopefully to convince them that if we can put our resources together and work bat on the same team or play on the same team, we can try and achieve that better reality. And so we have town halls, we have a lot of WhatsApp groups that we're always sharing links and messages through. With investors, we have regular catch-ups with them. We have a board that we also update very regularly. And in general, we just try and be very, very accessible for anyone on the team.
very good. Okay, so speaking of investors, startups have different models on how they raise finance. Some people bootstrap, other people go through rounds of VC. I'd be interested to find out what that process was like for you at Live Stores. How did you raise finance for your business?
Yeah, so when we started originally, for the first pilot that we did, so myself and my co-founder Andrew,
Mhm.
and also our pharmacist co-founder, who's based in Abuja, we put some capital together, personal cash, and just kind of ran the first store. So we learned a
Okay.
few things about, okay, so this has legs. Let's see where we can take it. And
Hmm.
then after the back of that, we called up a few friends and a few kind of contacts that we had, raised a small amount to kind of open up a couple more stores and start building out the software. And then with that traction, we started to kind of knock on doors of more institutional investors. And we were quite lucky, and we raised our seed round in February, so just before the COVID kind of craziness took off.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And now we're kind of using that as a platform to hopefully be able to really grow and get the software out to as many pharmacies as possible over the coming months. But it hasn't been an easy process, because I think, unlike maybe Silicon Valley or more developed markets, just the timelines you have to give yourself for fundraising are a lot
Right.
longer for us in Africa in general. I think people, well, firstly, there are not as many investors available to us at all the different stages. And by the way, the more senior you get in terms of the size of the round, the worse that problem becomes. So it's the volume of investors, it's
Mm-hmm.
the risk appetite amongst the high net worth individuals that we have, and then it's also just the fact that unlike maybe the USA or Europe, it's not like we have that many exits that we can point to, that we can say, okay, here's the Google that is gonna IPO and then start buying up companies afterwards, or people
Mm-hmm.
can leave it and start to launch their own businesses. We are
Mm-hmm.
starting to get that. We're starting to get some really big players in the space, which is awesome. But
Right.
we're still a way away from that. And so the overall ecosystem just needs a bit more time to mature. And
Right.
hopefully we will see the time to raise getting shorter and shorter over time. But right now, companies can take 18 months, 24 months to raise a seed
No.
round, which is obviously can be quite
Right.
disruptive for your operations.
Right. And I mean, thank you for sharing that. I think it's important to state that raising finance is not a walk in the park. Because a lot of times you hear numbers of different companies that have raised different amounts, but people don't really take the time to understand the commitment that it takes, the time that it takes, and how difficult it actually can be. And while we're talking about in the investment ecosystem, how do you think that we can encourage more local investors and people with means, so high net worth individuals, to really start investing within local companies? Because, like you mentioned, there is an investment ecosystem, and there are companies that are able to invest in various different companies. But a lot of times, you find that these investors are from abroad. So they're international
Hmm.
investors,
Hmm.
and they're not necessarily local investors. So I guess my question is, how do we foster a more enabling environment for local investors to feel comfortable investing in local companies?
Yeah, yeah, I can think of a few things there, right? I think ultimately, we are in a capitalist system, so the best incentive is for us to be successful. So the more, companies you see, startups you see that, have an exit or raise future rounds of capital, the
Mhm.
more these high net worth individuals will look at them and say, okay, pretty interesting. This is a space that I never thought about before. Maybe before I was putting my money in real estate, but I've now seen, X company or Y company do fantastically well, and I want to invest into this as well. So for us, it's, success begets success. So,
Mhm.
we think whenever there's a company that's done well in our space, in, tech startups, everybody's happy, right? Because it means that it's kind of telling a better story. It's changing the narrative about the space, and it's hopefully making our local investors pay more attention to the space. So I think that's probably maybe at the core of it, the main thing that will push them towards it. But certainly
Okay.
there are other things that have been tried and tested in other markets. Tax breaks, I've seen that work really well in some parts of Europe. So giving tax breaks if the company that you invested in does well or even doesn't do well. Uh,
Mhm.
General education about what it means to be a VC investor or an angel investor.
Yeah.
And how do you make sure that you can keep the entrepreneur engaged and still ambitious. I think this is changing now, but in the early days of our ecosystem, you'd have somebody give you a small check of like, I don't know, like 5K or 10K, and that's for 40% of your business, right? And
Yeah.
and you just kind of look at them and be like,
That's
yeah,
not
I
fair.
don't think that's gonna happen.
Sorry.
And that is starting to change, but there's still some of that traditional mindset of I invested
Right.
in you, you work for me, you're my employee. And what that does, unfortunately, is that it makes the entrepreneur have less degrees of freedom to actually build the
Yeah.
business that you want to benefit from. And so I think there is some education there that we will see, hopefully over time, as more and more startups kind of progress, we'll see less of that happening. But my bet is on kind of having a few of these startups, some of our colleagues in the space, exiting and doing big IPOs soon, and the
Mhm.
attention will really be on the space if that happens.
Okay. Very nice. Okay, so Brian, I have two more questions for you. I guess the first one would be, what's your vision for Life Stores? So how do you plan to scale it, in the next, say, 20, 30 years? Like, where do you see yourself, the company, in 20 to 30 years?
Yeah. So, I mean, the vision is effectively what we stated at the start, right? So it's around making sure that we can democratize access to primary healthcare. So, that problem that we talked about where, people do not have good enough access to primary healthcare, that's not just a Nigeria problem. That is a global problem, right?
Absolutely.
That's a problem in Francophone West Africa. That's a problem in East Africa. It's a problem all around the continent. It's a problem in South Asia. It's a problem in South America. And in many of these places, pharmacies play this very central role that they play in Nigeria. And so for us, when we think about the vision and how we scale, we start from the problem and we say, okay, where does this problem exist? It's not a Nigeria thing, but by figuring out how to scale it in Nigeria, we hopefully will create a formula that we can then apply to some of these other places or other markets. But right now we are still primarily focused on trying to figure out how to solve it in Nigeria. But we hold out the expectation that once we figure out at a scalable way how to make that happen, it should not be too much more difficult to apply it to other markets. And so that's kind of where we are right now. In terms of how we scale it, we will obviously continue to work with partner pharmacies all across the country. Both pharmacies that are in urban areas and chemists that are in peri-urban or semi-urban or even rural areas, just to make sure we can solve their needs. And then we're always looking at ways to kind of package that and offer it to players outside Lagos and outside the country as well.
Fantastic. And I guess my last question for you would be around, any advice that you may have for entrepreneurs, people that want to go into business, some of the things that you may have learned along the way, anything that you'd like to share for upcoming entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so I think, first and foremost, make sure that there is a problem there. So do your research. If you need to spend 6 months, speaking to the customer, do that. Sit with them, try and live their lives, right? So try and kind of see the world the way that they see the world. And, that will give you, because once you understand the problem, then you can actually play with the solution in various different forms. Because most likely the first solution you start off with is not the right one, and you're going to have to pivot a few times. But if you have a deep understanding of the problem, then you can be very flexible and you can actually know when you need to pivot. So I think that'd be my first piece of advice is, spend the time that you need to understand the problem. And that time is the time that you spend with your customer potentially. And then there's something that I've learned along the way, which is just the power of perseverance, right? And I don't think anyone can go through the ecosystem in Nigeria and not learn that lesson. So it's not a unique lesson that I've learned.
Yeah,
but it's
that's not just entrepreneur.
But it is a lesson nonetheless, right? And whether you're in the media space or you're in the healthcare space or something else, it's a market that throws a lot of surprises. And I think being able to take the punches and come back smiling the next day is very important. And often the thing that you need to be able to do that is a vision that is big enough that it energizes you, right? So you wake up in the morning and even if you are knocked down the day before, you kind of look at the vision and you're like, okay, this is worth it. There is a reason that I want to keep going. And so, I think if I was a young entrepreneur, I would hopefully have a vision that was big enough to motivate me through the ups and the downs, and then really try and understand the problem by spending time with customers.
Fantastic. I think that's some really great advice. So basically, identify a problem that can be solved and have perseverance because, not all days will be good. So have perseverance, essentially. Okay,
Yep, there'll
well,
be some
Bryan,
bad days along the way. So just
yeah,
gotta wake up.
you might as well get ready for them, right? Thank you so much, Bryan. And so tell us where we can, find Life Store's healthcare, like how can we get involved? How can we, visit the store or order our medicines from Life Stores?
Yeah, so you can reach us in a few ways. So we have actually two websites. One is lifestoreshealthcare.com, and we also have lifestorespharmacy.com as well for our specific pharmacy branch. You can visit either of them and reach out to our stores to organize a delivery if you need to. You can follow us on social media. On LinkedIn, we're Life Stores Healthcare. On Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, we are at Life Stores NG. And you can also just ping us there if you want to reach out. And then personally, I'm at Bryan Mezue on LinkedIn and at BC Mezue on Twitter.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bryan Mezue, for being such an amazing guest. It's been interesting learning about your company and also, how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected you. But also, it's interesting to hear about the innovative ways that you're trying to, scale through this crisis and, scale your company as well. So thank you so much for your time. We've come to the end of the program. So we look forward to staying in touch with you and finding out the amazing things that Lifestore Healthcare will continue to do. And have a great day.
Great. Thank you, Lele. I really appreciate spending time with you. And thanks for the questions.
Most welcome, Bryan. Speak to you soon. Take care.
Right. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, bye. Hi guys, thank you so very much for tuning in to another edition of Scaling Through Crisis. I had a really great time speaking to Bryan Mezue, who is the CEO of Lifestore Healthcare. It was really interesting to see how they are using, software and technology to essentially make the, end-to-end process for getting medicines and things of that nature right to your doorstep. So yeah, doing another exciting episode of Scaling Through Crisis, brought to you by Business Day Media and Endeavor Nigeria. Again, my name is Lele Balde, and I have been your anchor/host for the program, and I look forward to seeing you all next week on another edition of Scaling Through Crisis. Do have a great day and have a fabulous week.